content is brought to you by Algorand, which is the official sponsor of the Thinking Crypto channel and podcast. Algorand is building the technology to power the future of finance, the convergence of traditional and decentralized models into a unified system that is inclusive, frictionless, and secure. It is founded by Turing Award-winning cryptographer Silvio Micali. Algorand has developed a blockchain infrastructure that offers the interoperability and capacity to handle the volume of transactions needed for DeFi, financial institutions, and governments to smoothly transition into FutureFi. The technology of choice for more than 700 global organizations, Algorand is enabling the simple creation of next-generation financial products, protocols, and exchange of value. For more information, please visit algorand.com.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto channel, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Mance Harmon, who's the co-founder and CEO of Hedera Hashgraph. Mance, great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Mance, as mentioned before the recording, I'm a big Hedera fan. I hold the HBAR token, so I'm excited to speak with you and learn about as much as possible about Hedera. But let's start with your background. Where you're from and where did you grow up?
Yeah, so I am from the Deep South in the U.S., Mississippi, very rural Mississippi. It's this tiny little town no one's ever heard of in Northeast Mississippi. I graduated with 45 people and needed a way to bootstrap out of that rural environment. And so enlisted in the Air Force straight out of high school and went to work there for a couple of years in communications. They sent me to college and studied computer science and ended up going to work in a laboratory doing basic research in machine learning for the Air Force in their largest lab. It was Wright Lab back in the early 1990s. And that's where I come from. That's actually in that lab is where I met Lehman Baird, who is my co-founder of Hedera Hashgraph and also the inventor of Hashgraph. He's the one that created the tech. And he and I have been working together since 1993 when we met there as young officers working for the senior executive in the Air Force doing machine learning research, basic research.
Wow. So you guys worked together for a very long time. Before founding Hedera, were you working on other projects or other companies?
Yeah, so Lehman and I have done multiple startups together. The career we just sort of followed each other through our careers. We first started in the Air Force, working in this research lab that I'd mentioned. We both taught computer science at the Air Force Academy. I was the course director for cybersecurity. Back then, it wasn't even called cybersecurity. It was called information warfare. This is back in the 90s again. And then went off and managed this massive program for the Missile Defense Agency. Some of your viewers, maybe you will remember the movie War Games from the 1980s with Matthew Broderick.
Yep.
We built the real thing. So I managed that project, the equivalent of that in some ways for the government. And we built this massive missile defense simulator to learn how to protect our allies and population centers from incoming ballistic missiles. And that was great fun. And then Lehman and I decided we wanted to be entrepreneurs. And so we did 2 startups. I left the military. We did 2 prior startups in the space of identity and access management, sold both of those. Lehman then in 2012 really went to work on solving this hard math problem that I'm sure we're going to talk about. And that's what led to Hashgraph, the creation of Hashgraph that happened in 2015. And at the time I was in an identity company running their labs, helping them stand up a laboratory program as well as focused on architecture. And and the timing was right. So we, that's where this story picks up with Hashgraph, and and then everything changed from there.
Now, along that pathway of getting to Hedera and building it, where did you first encounter Bitcoin? I'm most curious about everyone's first encounter, and what was your aha moment about it?
It was 2013. So it was about the time that Lehman went to work. Actually, Lehman had gone to work on solving this problem. And let me just state the problem. The problem is, how do you create a consensus algorithm that both achieves the theoretical limits of what can be achieved in terms of security, reaches the theoretical limit in terms of security, while at the same time being highly performant? There had always been this trade-off between performance and security that the industry didn't know how to resolve. And this goes back decades, right? This is not a new thing. This goes back decades in database systems. So Lehman went to work, and maybe even 2011, 2012 timeframe, trying to solve this math problem. Had nothing to do with Bitcoin. It was just orthogonal. Now, of course, we've learned about Bitcoin, and Bitcoin. I always say that Bitcoin really made the market for what Lehman invented in Hashgraph. It wasn't that he invented Hashgraph because the market was made because of Bitcoin, right? It was the opposite. He invented Hashgraph independently without regard to anything happening with Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin made the market for the invention.
Wow.
And but that's about when I learned about Bitcoin. It was about 2013 timeframe. I was in this role, like I'd mentioned, heading up labs for this significant identity company, and just interested in how could we potentially use that for identity protocols, and came to some conclusions that it was really tough with that original Bitcoin code base. Its performance was not there. And coincidentally, Lehman was working on Hashgraph. So that back 2013 is about my earliest involvement with Bitcoin.
So I asked everyone that I interview, what do they hold in their crypto portfolio? I'm assuming you have some HBAR, maybe some.
I have some HBAR. I have a lot of HBAR. I don't have much else, to be honest with you. I don't have much else. I don't. It just makes no sense financially, outside of wanting to, some maybe balance risk across a portfolio. But the HBAR holdings cover my exposure to the crypto market, and that's the way I would characterize it.
So let's talk a bit more about Hedera. Tell us about how is it different from other blockchains out there, and what are the use cases that you're bringing to the table for whether it be institutions or whoever it may be? Yeah,
so it's different in a lot of ways. It's actually different in more ways than it is the same, is what I would say. And so the tech first, number one, the technology is fundamentally different than everything else. It does have these properties that I described. Lehman did solve that problem. He found a way to simultaneously maximize performance and security at the same time, meaning that if you reach that theoretical limit, then we've done about as good as you can do in terms of performance. Now, if you were to sacrifice security, you might be able to do better. And some platforms have done that. They've sacrificed security and they've bumped up performance a little bit, but now that security is coming at a cost. So, but if you maximize security, we've done the best you can do at performance. That's one thing. We always understood from the beginning, though, that the tech was only half of the equation. Equally important, if not more important in the long term, is the governance of this public network. And so what we did was take inspiration from the Visa network back when it got started in the 60s. A guy named D. Hawk was the founder. He wrote a book about it, and he outlined the governance model in this book. And we marked it up, and we built a governance model that today is unlike anything else in the market. Today, we have 25 global blue chip organizations that create the council for Hedera. These are organizations like Boeing and Google and IBM and LG and FIS WorldPay and DLA Piper global law firms and banks, Shinhan out of Korea and Standard Bank out of South Africa. It's a broad range of organizations, best in class, and they are Hedera in a very real sense. They are Hedera. And what I mean by that is that they are members of an LLC, a legal structure. They are legally members of the LLCs. This is a lot more than just a marketing agreement. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Oh,
right?
sure.
It's not that we just came together and said, let's market this together. They are Hedera in a legal sense.
Wow.
And they provide the oversight and the governance of this platform. There's growing from 25 to 39. We've been adding members now for a little more than 2 years, and we'll get to 39. And it's structured and designed to represent all of the use cases in the global market across all industries. So we don't have a bunch of banks exclusively or a bunch of tech giants. It's a broad range of industries, and they're all geo-distributed. And then finally, they can't stay members forever. They have to bow out after 6 years and be replaced by somebody else. And so it really is distributed or decentralized both through industry, geography, and through time, and they govern the platform. And that, I think, is unique in the industry, and it is a source of our value proposition and our strength. When you think about the decentralization of the platform, in some very fundamental, real ways, we're more decentralized both in the number of organizations that are deciding on the governance matters, as well as the number of nodes that are balancing the voting on the ordering of the transactions. So both technical decentralization and ordering of the transactions. There's not 4 or 5 massive organizations that have all the quote hashing power, right? That are dictating the order. It's not the case. And it's not just a single foundation or a handful of core developers that are making the real decisions on the code base and the use of treasury, et cetera. It's a decentralized organization in both of those dimensions.
Wow. Yeah. When I saw those respective relationships that you have, and it's great that you give some clarity as to they are actually a part of Hedera via the LLC. How did these relationships come about, like Boeing and Google and IBM and LG? I know you may not be able to disclose too much, but there's a lot of blockchain projects out there. Not many work with Google and IBM and so forth. How did those relationships come about?
A lot of hard work. We started with this vision, and really in 2017 is when we kicked everything off with respect to Hedera. And whenever we were socializing this or talking to the market privately and about this before we were public with our plans, people thought we were crazy. They thought, how in the world are you going to get 39 blue chip organizations to work together? Have you ever tried to get 2 to work together? 2 global enterprises. And yeah, it sounds hard, and it is hard. So make no mistake, it was hard. But the mechanics of it were pretty straightforward. It was very much like a software sales pitch, sort of a SaaS offering. You have this vision, you know what you want to do, you have great tech, and you find the decision makers, influencers within these organizations, and you pitch them. And you find an evangelist, somebody inside the organization that is a believer, and they take it on and they become sort of the sponsor within the organization, and they help you shepherd it through the process. The process is onerous. to have an organization like one of these blue chips join, because they're joining a legal entity like what we are, an LLC. It's not just a marketing organization or relationship, rather. It goes through M&A on their end, and the M&A process for any big organization is not simple, and in many cases it results in a senior executive or even a board level approval on joining joining Hedera in this case. And so make no mistake, it was not easy. It's a lot easier today than it was when we started. Getting the first 5 was by far the hardest. We knew it would be. And as we've grown and the market's matured, it's gotten easier over time. And the nature of the relationships have changed over time as well. Early on, when we got the first 5, with one exception, notable exception in DLA Piper, those first 5 just, they didn't know exactly what they wanted to do. They knew that this is going to be an important market and that they would have use cases, but they didn't know what they were. And they wanted to come along with us to try and figure that out over time. And they have. And a lot of them are now working on projects. DLA Piper knew from the beginning. But today it's different. When we have council members joining today, the reason they're joining most of the time is because they already know what they want to do. We've been working with them on a project first, and then it becomes clear they're a great candidate for council membership, and they decide to join the council.
So tell us a bit about, and you may have touched on this, and so I apologize if I'm asking this question again, but as these blue chip companies come on board, how are they leveraging the respective Hedera network? And is it for payments, tokenization, things along those lines?
It's all across the board. So the nice thing about Hedera is that it is a general purpose public network, meaning that it's not special purpose for one use case. And even that was by design, right? I mean, from the very beginning, we wanted the council members to reflect the full universe of use cases across all the industries, and they do, and they each have their own interests, and now they're building and going to market with products that in many ways are totally unrelated, except the fact that they're in crypto, and there's some certain relationship by nature of the fact that they're talking about crypto projects in general. DLA Piper has the Toco platform that is a token issuance platform built on top of us. They originally started by focusing on tokenization of commercial real estate. It's now much broader than that. And they have a whole pipeline of projects that are underway in their platform. Shinhan and Standard Bank have demonstrated a POC with for stable coins and the use of stable coins for the exchange and cross-border remittances between those two banks, Korea and South Africa and Africa generally. ServiceNow, a huge organization. Maybe not many of your listeners or viewers will recognize the name, but they're a $130 billion organization that is in workflows, data workflows for thousands of the largest organizations in the world. So if you're in tech and your enterprise or even medium-sized business, you know about ServiceNow. They have demonstrated POCs for using our services in Hedera to improve service level agreements that are associated with the contracts that you sign when you purchase a product or a service from a tech company, or et cetera. And they're building into their platform, the Now platform, that's what they call it, the ability for their customers to more easily use and deploy distributed ledger applications, and all of that is built on top of us. And so, and the list goes on. They're across the board, all types of different applications or dApps across the industries.
That's amazing. So I have to ask, what is, let's say, your 5-year outlook for Hedera? Where do you see Hedera in 5 years, or at least the vision, the roadmap towards adoption and getting more folks on board as well?
5 years from now, I think we will have mass adoption. And I think that all the foundational work is being done now. A lot of it has been done. The kinds of things that I just described, for example, with ServiceNow, I mean, we have a platform, and our platform is now being used by their platform, which represents an aggregation point for a huge range of customers on their end, right? And that's what's happening. We built the platform. There are these other aggregation points in other platforms, aggregation points for large scale adoption of the tech, right? All of that is happening. And that's on the enterprise side. And then in parallel, alongside of that is sort of retail adoption or consumer adoption. And that's by and large being led by NFTs. I sort of view NFTs as the gateway drug to crypto for most of the world, right? I mean, a lot of people would say that was Bitcoin. Yeah, sort of. NFTs are different in that a lot of people that maybe would not have bought Bitcoin or didn't consider buying Bitcoin are buying NFTs, right? And so I view that NFTs, NFTs are really playing the role that email played for the adoption of the World Wide Web back in the early 90s. In the early 90s, we had Mosaic, which was the first browser of note that preceded Netscape. And then, then the world took off in terms of World Wide Web. But it was difficult to explain it to my parents. What is the World Wide Web? Well, if you've never used it and you don't know, you don't have any applications that you use or depend on, how do you describe the World Wide Web? And we're in a similar sort of moment now where NFTs are being adopted on a broad scale, and people for the first time are beginning to understand, even if they don't understand the tech, they understand crypto in a new way than they previously did. And so there's both enterprise adoption that is being built out and taking place alongside sort of retail adoption. And 5 years from now, I think that all of that is going to be mainstreamed, and who knows where the dApps are going to take us. I have a lot of ideas of where we're going on the enterprise side. It's very difficult to predict that. On the retail side, you find some killer app that comes along and sort of changes the game in fundamental ways. On the enterprise side, it's more about incremental improvements to existing process and process automation and improving risks. So it's a lot easier to predict on the enterprise side than it is on the retail side.
For sure. Tell us a bit about the tokenomics of the HBAR token and how that functions within the network.
Well, the token is there both for security and for utility. It's there for security in that we're a proof of stake system. What that means ultimately is that the voting on the order of transactions is weighted by the number of tokens that a particular node represents. And this is what you need. You want to make sure that you have broad distribution of the tokens, and not more than a third of the total supply can be held by a single bad actor, or they could cause problems, right? So there's the security layer that exists there and depends on the token. And then the token is used for utility. If you want to use the services, if a developer wants to use the services of the network to build a distributed application, they have to have HBAR. And when they make the API call to our our file system or our smart contract system or our consensus service or our token service, tokenization service, they pay for that API call with the HBAR at the time of the API call. So it's with every call to the network, you have to pay for its use with HBAR. And so that then is, token flow into the network, and it gets paid out to the nodes in ways that most of your viewers are probably very familiar with. We have 50 billion tokens that have been minted, and I expect there will never be any more tokens than that. It would take the council having to vote on changing that number or deciding to mint more or even to burn, right? We don't burn either. So it's not likely that we'll either mint nor burn tokens. And to make that happen would require a unanimous vote on the council, which would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to change those things. So those are the token economics. I don't know the latest, but we have a schedule on the website of how many tokens have been distributed into the market. I just recalling, shooting from the hip here, I think it's about 18 or 19 billion of the total 50 that were minted are actually distributed into the market, and the others still sit in Hedera Treasury at the moment.
Got it. And you mentioned proof of stake. And I apologize if I missed this, but can token holders, retail token holders, can they stake currently, or is that something in the works?
No, it is definitely in the works. So they can't today. What we expect in terms of 2022 tech roadmap, if you will, is the next big thing that's coming up is the newest version of smart contracts. So smart contracts 2.0 are going to improve on the first version of smart contracts for us in some fundamental ways, dramatically improving the performance of smart contracts and providing a solution for developers that I don't think otherwise exists in the market. We have a native token service, meaning that anyone that wants to create or issue tokens can do so on our network today without the use of smart contracts. And the token service lets you do about 80% of what you would want to do as a developer in administering all the different features of a token. Do you require KYC, for example, on a token? You need to be able to mint tokens. You need to be able to burn tokens. You need to be able to lock tokens. Other things, other administrative functions that you might want to use when managing a token supply. Those 80% of what you want to do is in the native token service itself. Most platforms, almost all the platforms, don't provide that. What they provide are smart contracts that implement the same features, but then they run on top of the platform rather than being part of the native core of the platform itself. We have the token service, which is native, and now we're upgrading the smart contract service, but they'll be able to work together. In other words, you can still use the token service and the 80% of those features, and then minimize the amount of smart contract code that you have to use to just what you don't get in the token service. And that then is really beneficial to developers in that they don't have to rely so much on the security of smart contract. Of course, you still want to do your security audits, but now you've minimized the surface area for attacks on smart contracts, or where you might make mistakes as developers, bugs on the smart contract service, and the two can work together seamlessly with really high performance. So smart contracts is next in terms of major feature releases. And also on the roadmap is the ability for HBAR holders to do staking and community nodes. The two sort of go hand in hand. Today, the council members, the 25 that I mentioned, run the nodes. And that was also by design as we bootstrap the system. Next up are community nodes, and we will make it possible for community members to run nodes. Will know who they are. They'll have to go through a KYC process, not anonymous nodes, not at this stage, but KYC community nodes, along with staking, along with staking. And yes, those are on the roadmap for this year, and in sort of that order. I think that it'll be that order.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see that those items roll out. There were some news items I wanted to just touch on, and I think you touched on some of them. For example, Shinhan Bank, they're going to conduct Stablecoin International Remittance payments on the Hedera network. Can you tell us a bit about that and how they're going to be using those stablecoins? Is it within their own branches or with other banks and things like that?
Yeah, so it was a POC between Shinhan and Standard Bank. It ran for 4 months. What they demonstrated was the ability to create their own stable coins in their native currencies in both jurisdictions or both countries, and then do direct remittances between the two. And it really served as a test on their part to see if they could get the tech to work, that it would work in the way that they thought that it would be performant. And I don't want to speculate publicly about what's next for them, except to say that they both thought it was a successful POC, and they are, now making plans to do whatever is next. The other thing that maybe is worth noting is that Standard Bank has also talked publicly about the use of Hedera for tokenized bond issuances. So they also are exploring that, and I should say pursuing that, which I also think is really exciting. If it's sort of the beginning of the mainstreaming of DeFi in some ways, having centralized banks begin to tokenize financial products and in a decentralized way. And this is just another example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is certainly exciting and such a big use case as well. There was also another news item, if I'm saying Animoca brands and Hedera Helix wrap an NFT-based football game in 2021 that took place last year.
Yeah, Animoca. And so Animoca is certainly one of the market leaders in terms of game studio organizations that are embracing crypto. And they have been for some time now. Yatsu is the CEO, founder of Animoca. One thing that I had read, I didn't know until recently, is that, and this is just as sort of an aside, Animoca has invested in more NFT related projects than anyone else except A16Z. So Andreessen Horowitz. So that gives you a sense of their priority and sort of central importance on the crypto space as an organization, Animoca. What they're doing with us is building out a game. It's football. I mean, it's European football, soccer. US people would call it soccer. With organizations, football organizations, where they are going to make it possible to create tokenized assets within the game itself, and those assets are collateralized with HBAR, which I don't think has ever been done. It's sort of like having an NFT that represents whatever it represents. It could be a player or a card or, shoes or, whatever the NFT represents, and simultaneously is collateralized with crypto, that being HBAR in the case. So if you get one of these digital assets from one event, this Animoca game, not only are you getting the ownership of what it represents, but you're also getting its collateralization in the HBAR. And that, alongside of another project that they're pursuing, which is the creation of a leaderboard that is more secure than just standard leaderboards. So when we talk about leaderboards, for those that may not be familiar with the term, you've all seen it. You have some game on your smartphone and you're playing it, and you can see the leaders of the game, the users and their scores. Maybe it shows you the top 10 for the game over some period of time. Those are leaderboards. And believe it or not, game developers lose a lot of money when leaderboards get hacked or get corrupted. And so there is a strong financial motivation for creating more secure leaderboards, and Animoca has designs on how to do exactly that by using the Hedera platform for ensuring that or recording the stats for the leaderboard and making it more difficult, if not impossible, for it to be hacked if it were a centralized leaderboard. So those are some cool things that Animoca is out developing.
Wow, yeah, that is very cool. I love the aspect of what you mentioned with the collateralized NFTs. That is, I don't think anybody else is doing that. So that's very fascinating. And
yeah, no, that's way cool. We knew when discussing it with them that this would be something new in the market. So we're just anxious for them to complete that work and go to market with it.
Before we jump to the other aspect of the interview, talking about the crypto market at large, you talked about some of the items on the roadmap. I'm going to ask a question you can say I cannot answer, but I'm curious, any hints as to who might be a next governance council member?
No, you're right. I can't. I mean, there's no way I could do that. We're very tight-lipped, as you would expect. And even once we know, we go to great lengths to make sure that news doesn't leak until the press goes to market. It's it's just one of those extremely sensitive areas that we have to be careful about.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump to the other aspect of the interview here. I want to get your thoughts, given that you've been working and building in the crypto industry for a long time, since the beginning, before the beginning of Bitcoin.
Or crypto.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on how the market has grown? And we've seen adoption in multiple fronts. As far as Bitcoin, mining is booming in the United States. You have corporates putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. El Salvador has made Bitcoin a legal tender. What's your thoughts on all these things?
Well, look, I'm very bullish on the industry in general. I think we're still at the early stages of it. I drew an analogy with the World Wide Web. Mm-hmm. And people do this all the time. Where are we if we're trying to use one of those analogies? I really do think that we're sort of at the Netscape moment. I think we're past Mosaic. We're past Mosaic. The number of people that are using this are sort of like at the Netscape moment, and the use cases are being identified, and the world is beginning to adopt. Now, when it comes to specific currencies like Bitcoin, I'm more bullish today than I have been. I've always thought it's risky. It still is risky. I mean, we do have a lot of adoption, and even in sort of anecdotal cases, countries beginning to adopt and use. But we also see a lot of countries shutting it down. Right? It's in shutting down mining and specifically outlawing it and that sort of thing. So it remains to be seen exactly where this is going to end up. But I do think that the industry as a whole is here forever. It does serve as the foundational components of Web 3.0. I think Web 3.0 is going to change the way that we live our lives and conduct commerce with one another. It's going to begin to resolve some of societal problems, I hope, some of society's problems that are emergent from sort of Web 2.0 and the growth of walled gardens around product offerings, especially in the social space, which I think is kind of interesting, right? If I may, just for like 30 seconds, we go back to the World Wide Web days, right? Back into the 90s, and the World Wide Web was taking off and just exploding. And at the same time, there existed walled gardens in these networks, which Prodigy and CompuServe and I forget the others. And that's interesting. We forget, right? But they did exist.
Right.
They did exist, and even Microsoft was building out their own walled garden. There's a famous story about Bill Gates struggling, sort of agonizing over the decision whether to go to market with this or to turn the ship 180 degrees and embrace the open standards World Wide Web. He turned the ship. They did embrace open standards World Wide Web, and they went to market with the Internet Explorer, ultimately squashed Netscape. That same sort of process hasn't yet happened in the world of social, right? If you think about the next generation of platforms that came after the 90s, after the bubble burst in 2000, it's the social platforms. And those social platforms are the Prodigies and the CompuServes of the world today. There are no standards, open standards for social that would break down those walls and the algorithms that are being developed to maximize profits in each one of those walled gardens are in part what is driving the division in society, right? And so I think that really fundamentally needs to be addressed. And there's an opportunity for crypto to help address those problems. And ultimately, it's going to require open standards across social and breaking down those barriers in the same sort of ways that we did back in the 90s with the World Wide Web. So I'm very bullish on crypto, quote, quote, on distributed ledger technology in general and the benefits it can bring to society here in the coming years.
Yeah, absolutely in agreement with you. I had a quick question, and I don't know if you can answer this, but it's because it's kind of maybe a bit trivial, but there is talks about Bitcoin is crypto 1.0 technology. And if we were to, parallel that to Web 0.1, Web 2.0, Web 3.0, and I view like Hedera as a crypto 3.0 a blockchain project or network. And some are saying, well, Bitcoin eventually may become irrelevant because, you look at the transaction costs and the transactions per second, it's not really scalable. What are your thoughts on that? And if we were to parallel that to Yahoo and then come along Google and so forth, any thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, so when you look at other standards that have emerged over time, let's just take Ethernet as an example. Ethernet, of course, is the name that we all know of and understand is the networking standard that we all use if you were to plug in your computer to the wall. We're not talking about Wi-Fi, right? We're talking about wired networking. So Ethernet is the networking standard. Turns out that Ethernet, the Ethernet of today is not the Ethernet that there was when it was first introduced as a standard. And so Ethernet 1.0 looks very different than it does today, but it's still the same name. It's still the same brand. And Bitcoin fills a certain role within the industry. It's different than what HBAR does, or any other token for that matter. I mean, most of the industry views Bitcoin as a store of value technology, or asset, I should say, store of value asset. And it may be that the technology that underpins it morphs over time in response to market pressures and market demands. But it's always called Bitcoin, right? It could always be called Bitcoin, and sort of the same way that Ethernet has always been called Ethernet, but has changed over the years. So I do understand that it's difficult to, there are lots of both political and social and financial constraints in making that transition from where we are today with Bitcoin to maybe something that's different in the future with Bitcoin. Who knows how that's going to evolve over time? I wouldn't venture to predict. It's just impossible. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if Bitcoin is around forever and fills the role that it fills, which is complementary to the rest of the crypto industry, including Hedera, HBAR. I mean, we're here to make it possible for developers to build arbitrary, highly performant, highly sophisticated apps, or dApps, high volume transactions, many thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of transactions per second, which you simply can't do with Bitcoin today, and that's okay, right? So, but I expect that Bitcoin's probably around forever, even if the tech that underpins it morphs over the years to address market pressures.
Appreciate your perspective on that. I also do believe it'll be around a long time, because there's the tech aspect, but there's also the monetary aspect. And I look at gold and fiat, and because of that store of value, gold has been around, even though it's almost irrelevant from a day-to-day usage standpoint. Go back a few hundred years and it wasn't, but it's still here, and it's still an asset. And I view the same thing with Bitcoin. It will still be around as an asset. I want to get your thoughts on US crypto regulations. You're on the building side of things. There's still need for clarity. There's still some roadblocks on the SEC side. They're suing Ripple over XRP, Terra Luna. Congress seems to be awakening about crypto. There's more hearings and things along those lines. And then you had the infrastructure bill debacle. What are your thoughts, and are you optimistic that maybe this year we may see some comprehensive crypto regulations?
It's an election year, and that could cut both ways, right? So on the one hand, those that want to be elected want to align themselves with various constituencies so that they get the most votes possible, and that maybe could benefit us. I mean, we as an industry did for the first time sort of make it clear that we're relevant with the infrastructure bill, and everyone came out in force to lobby, and when that was going on, and our voices were heard in a different way than they had been previously. And so now the politicians are taking notice and realizing this is important, and the population at large cares about this issue increasingly, especially with the NFT surge that we're seeing. And so it does in some ways become an election year issue. We'll see whether that helps or hurts in terms of getting any meaningful legislation through this year. I don't know. When it comes to the regulators, not Congress, but the regulators specifically, the hope and goal is that we can educate them, and so that they know the issues, that I do think that they want to make changes and it's really easy for them not to understand the subtleties of the technology and get it wrong. And that's even more so on the congressional side, right? Those that are writing the laws know even less about the technology and how it works than the regulators understand.
Sure.
In terms of predicting what they're going to do, we try not to anymore. It's been going on for years and years. But honestly, if you had asked me back in 2017, would we be where we are today here in 2022? I would have figured that it would have been resolved by now, and it's not been. So it's been a really slow process in the United States. When we see things happening like what you mentioned with Ripple, and we look at what's going on between the regulators and the platform and everything that is public about it, we try not to read the tea leaves too much. What we do is look at what is known and sort of compare that to our own stance on the various issues and see whether or not we need to adjust our positioning at all based on whatever new knowledge there is. That rarely happens. What I mean is it's rarely the case that anything that happens that would cause us to adjust our personal stance, because we've had a lot of conviction and about our approach from the beginning. We directly engaged with the regulators from day one almost. In fact, in 2017, when I was hiring our initial team members, the RGC, our general counsel, was in the top 5. I forget where she was. Number 3, I think. So that's how much importance and emphasis we've placed on it, and we've taken a position of engagement from the beginning. So it's rarely the case that anything happens in the market that causes us to change our positioning. So anyway, it's hard to predict, and we'll have to see how this unfolds over the coming months.
Yeah, and despite some of these things, I do feel we're moving in the right direction. I see more members of Congress are rallying together, and there's some bipartisan support, which is good. They usually don't agree on a lot together, but at least we're seeing both sides of the aisle, people coming together, putting together bills and things like that.
Yeah, well, here in Texas, I'm in Texas, by the way, for your viewers. I had the good fortune of being one of the founding board members of the Texas Blockchain Committee, CBC. And that happened back in early 2020, March, April timeframe of 2020. And what we've seen in Texas anyway is really strong support for the industry in a way that we haven't seen in other states, or certainly at the national level. We see the miners, the Bitcoin miners in particular, moving from China to Texas, right? Because of the deregulated infrastructure grid, the energy grid here that represents the opportunity for miners to do quite well. We've seen an explosion in that. And just last year, we had a conference where a lot of the politicians showed up and lent their voices to the industry. And in some ways, Texas became the epicenter of the crypto industry at large over the past 18 months. And I think that trend is going to continue.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised when Governor Abbott, he talked about, he released all the regulations and giving the green light to Bitcoin miners. So that's awesome. I think Texas is in the lead here. Wyoming's probably close behind, and Mayor Suarez out of Miami is trying to do some things. So really, really excited to see more states jump on board and follow Texas's lead.
Yeah, and that was the goal. The goal was if we could get it done in Texas, then it could play a role of leadership at a national level, and I'm expecting that to happen.
Awesome. So a couple more questions and we'll wrap it up here. What are your thoughts on central bank digital currency, CBDCs? Do you feel they could be complementary to crypto? And there's something I've been talking to various folks about, and that is in the United States, we have the Constitution and then right to privacy and things like that. And maybe if you have any thoughts on how the United States could potentially get the digital dollar, we know it's coming, right, where they don't track everything we do. I don't know. Maybe that's not.
Well, no, that is the fear, right? The fear is that privacy rights will be damaged with the introduction of a CBDC, and I think that would be a terrible outcome. None of us want that. We don't have. I mean, it's possible because of the technology to track every single transaction in a way that is not possible if you're using cash, fiat, right? And so there is an opportunity for our rights to be trampled. I'm hopeful that won't happen. I know that there are a lot of people, at the end of the day, it boils down to a political issue. And because it's not a tech issue. If we want to build this in such a way where privacy exists and we ensure it, then fantastic, we can do that. But it's all about politics at the end of the day. Now, in terms of the technologies, I think that the CBDCs are complementary to the rest of crypto. It's not the case. I would not anticipate it being the case that the feds are going to run smart contract platforms or distributed file systems, right? Those sorts of things. And those are components of dApps that are required, right? When you're building a distributed application today on a public network, you're using file storage and you're using smart contracts by and large, or you're using layer 2 networks that implement all of these application solutions in a separate network that then consume the services of the layer 1 network. And in many cases, those could be native services or smart contract service or whatever. Those will still exist and need to be there for distributed applications. And those services, I do not expect the government to provide. I would not expect the government to build out a general purpose public network. They would build a digital dollar, right? And they would have a ledger that has the ownership, the account and balances of the owners of the digital dollar. And so I think that there is a synergy that could result from CBDCs with the existing layer 1 and layer 2 infrastructure that exists in the market today. It's also an interesting question of, is it needed beyond what we have in stable coins, right? We have Circle and Tether and there may be others. Are those sufficient, right? Maybe those are good enough.
Sure.
There's a whole debate around that. But at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of momentum at the sovereign level on a global basis for there to be digital equivalents of their existing fiat. And that's probably true here in the US as well. And there's still a lot of thorny governance and privacy issues that have to be addressed as we go through this process. But I think ultimately, if it exists, it's only good for the industry. It's complementary to what we do. It's complementary to what all our peers do. Maybe Bitcoin would suffer. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely to be seen. Okay, so some wrap-up questions here. First is, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
It wouldn't be a single thing. The interesting thing about the metaverse, when I think of the metaverse, it's not a single place. It is a universe of diverse shared worlds. And those shared worlds exist both in private contexts, private networks, as well as public networks. When Lehman invented Hashgraph back in 2015, we created a company then, which was the quote parent company of Hedera. It was the original member of this LLC that is Hedera today. And we called that company Swirlds, SWIRLDS. And the reason we called it that was because we envisioned from the very beginning shared worlds. It's a mashup of shared worlds. And that is the vision. It continues to be the vision. The vision for Hashgraph is that you're able to reach out, grab a slice of cyberspace, and without the use of third parties, trusted third parties, just on a pure peer-to-peer basis, be able to invite whomever you want to participate in this shared world with you. And those could be friends or family in sort of the social context. Those could be business colleagues in a business context. It's the full range of use cases for peer-to-peer relationships in these shared peer-to-peer sort of independent spaces. Those collectively will integrate with one another using technologies that we in part are building and others, and exchange tokens with one another, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is the metaverse. And then, of course, when people think about the metaverse, they often think about it in terms of user interfaces. It's a lot more than a user interface, right? They think about it in terms of what you see with Facebook, and you put on, the Oculus or some goggles, and you're in this virtual world. Well, that's just UI, pure UI. And the metaverse exists outside of UI, although UI is going to be an important part of it. And that is what we've been building as an industry now for years. And it's a universe of shared worlds.
Rapid fire questions. Favorite food?
Gummy worms, excuse me.
Favorite musician or band?
I'm sorry?
Favorite musician or band?
It depends on the decade. Last decade, Rodrigo E. Gabriela. It's a great duet, guitar duet.
I know them very well. A friend of ours, my wife and I, they introduced us to them, and they saw them live in person. They're amazing.
Oh, wow. I would love to go see them. I've been a big fan now for, 15 years.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So good. I'm a guitar player, so I love it. Favorite movie?
Also depends on decade. One of my all-time favorites, this goes way back, is Amadeus from the 1980s. I think it's just a masterpiece. So if I had to go with, if you all of the sort of the Marvel and superhero movies are old at this point. You can't say any of those are going to be your favorite. We got to go with something a little more highbrow than that. We'll go with Amadeus.
Awesome. Favorite book?
Bible. The wisdom is incredibly important, in my opinion, for the role that I play, and finding inspiration and wisdom there for leading an organization like this one is important to me.
Sure. And when you're not working at Hedera, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
I play guitar as well. So two things. Classical guitar, I picked it up when I turned 40 with my sixth grader at the time. He dropped out 6 months later. I kept with it. So that, and I love to tinker with old motorcycles. I actually have an old Royal Enfield that for your viewers, if you sort of envision the World War II drab olive green motorcycle with the sidecar military bike, that's it. And so I like motorcycles. I ride with my kids, and I like to work on them.
Oh, that's awesome. Very cool. Mance, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to see the new updates that roll out in 2022 for Hedera, and would love to have you back on as those things go live. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's been fun.